Hello everyone, welcome back to YouTube channel Duval Mafia here, and in today's video I'm actually going to be starting a brand new series in which I'm going to go over every single draft pick that the Jacksonville Jaguars made in the 2021 NFL Draft. And of course I'm going to start at the top of the list with Trevor Lawrence. He was the first pick overall, round 1, pick number 1, and of course he is the quarterback that came out of Clemson, and his stats on the season: he started in all 17 games. He played in all 17 games. He had 359 completions out of 602 attempts for a 59.6% completion percentage. He had 3,641 passing yards. He had 12 touchdowns. He had 17 interceptions. His longest pass of the year was 58 yards. His yards per attempt was 6.0. His yards per game was 214.2. His rating for the year was 71.9. His QBR for the year was 33.6. He was sacked 32 times and lost 238 yards in sack yardage. He had one fourth quarter comeback and he led 2 game-winning drives. For the rushing stats, he had 73 rushing attempts, 334 yards, which is 4.6 yards per attempt. He had 19.6 rushing yards per game, and he had 2 rushing touchdowns. So now that these stats are out of the way, I'm going to more talk about what he did this year. And overall, Trevor Lawrence had an okay rookie season. Now, I'm really taking into the fact that he was 21 years old, turned 22 during the season, and he also had a very mediocre at best supporting cast this season. Between the injuries to DJ Chark, Travis Etienne, and many others, and on top of lack of production out of players like Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones Jr., and many others, it was just a very lackluster season. And that being said, Trevor Lawrence definitely did not meet expectations for most Jaguars fans, me included. And I honestly expected a little bit more out of him, even though it is his rookie season. I do understand it does take a while for especially quarterbacks to get somewhat adjusted to the NFL level. But on the other hand, I was kind of disappointed in the overall stats that he did put up. Now, I know stats aren't everything, and stats really don't mean too much, but I was very underwhelmed by these stats. He had good yardage, like 3,641 yards is actually decent for a rookie quarterback, but having 17 interceptions and then 12 touchdowns passing-wise is just not great. I honestly would have liked to see a bit more out of that. Now, I do understand some of the blame does go on the supporting cast, whether it is his wide receivers, tight ends, offensive line, running backs, and all of that. And it also, part of the blame does go on coaching, which obviously the Urban Meyer situation happened, as well as the offensive coordinator, Darrell Bevell, who took over as interim head coach. He started off the year very slow with his offensive scheme, and to start the year, Trevor Lawrence struggled a lot. But I will say, towards the end of the year, specifically the last game, I saw a lot that I liked more out of Trevor Lawrence. And for me, his worst game of the year was, funny enough, the first game, and his best game was the last game of the year. Now, I think he might have had a close game for the bad and the good in the middle there. But honestly, off the top of my head, for me, the worst game that he had this year was probably that first week. He was airing out the ball very well, but he was doing it very sloppily, and I believe he had 4 turnovers in that game, 3 interceptions and a fumble, which, I mean, if you have 4 interceptions in the game, you're not going to win that game, and you're not going to look good in that game at all. And for the last game, he had a very clean, and he played a very good offensive day in the last game of the season against the Colts, which we obviously spoiled their season in the process. But for me, Trevor looked very composed in that game, and he showed a lot of growth. If you go back and watch the very first game or the first few games of the season, then you come back and watch the last couple games, specifically the last game of the season, in which Trevor really, he grew as a player, which is what you want to see out of your star player. When you're drafted number 1 overall, you do have a lot of expectations on you, and you also have a lot on your shoulders pressure-wise. So I will give Trevor Lawrence a little bit of a leisure there, as he did deal with a lot of struggles between the injuries to his playmakers, the struggles with the coaching staff, the struggles with his teammates when it came down to his wide receivers specifically. For me, the biggest struggle this year was out of his wide receivers. Laviska Shenault struggled with drops heavily. Marvin Jones, even though he's nothing, like he wasn't anything special, I was expecting a bit more out of him this offseason. And then, of course, with DJ Chark going down, that hurt Trevor a lot because that was his main deep threat, his main speed guy. And that was his main true game changer. But overall, if I'm going to grade Trevor Lawrence's rookie season, I'm probably going to be a little bit lenient and give him a B-. Now, for non-Jags fans, they're going to think that's very generous. And for Jags fans, they're going to think that's very harsh. And that's why I kind of feel like this is a very fair rating. I think a B-, maybe even a C+, is a very fair rating for Trevor Lawrence for this season. Because you have to understand, even though he did have a lot against him, he was still the first overall pick, and he was still had a lot of expectations on his shoulders, which isn't necessarily fair to him because he was a rookie in a very rough situation. But if it comes down to it, he did have a lot of expectations on his shoulders, as I said, and he didn't really play to those expectations. He started to flash it in the end of the year, where the end of the year, he ended it very well with over 200 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. He played extremely well in that final game, and I was very happy to see that. But in my honest opinion, that's one of the worst things that you saw out of him. And even though I did say his worst game of the year was the first game, and I will say, to touch on that, I will say he did have 3 touchdowns in that game, passing-wise, but the 3 interceptions for me was just a very major problem. And actually, I was wrong. I will correct myself. He actually had 4 interceptions in the Titans game in Week 14. So technically, that would be a worse game. So technically, his worst game did come in Week 14. But on the other side of things, so that would be his worst game of the season. But still, in any game that you have 3 or more turnovers, and even 2 turnovers is too many, but any game you have 3 or more turnovers, I'm counting that as a very bad game for you. And I'm going to be very harsh on you in that aspect, because let's be honest, you cannot do that. I don't care who you are. If you're turning over the ball that much in a game, you're going to cost your team a lot of chance at winning, and you're really going to cut their chance of winning from decent to slim to none. So overall, his grade is going to be a B- for me. I think it might be slightly generous, but I am giving him the benefit of the doubt because he was very young when he came in. He came in at 21, turning 22 during the season. Even though he was the first overall pick, he had a lot against him between his teammates getting hurt, his teammates' lack of production, his coach, obviously, he has his coach fired midseason, and he had a lot of debacles with that. His offensive coordinator struggled early on in the season. He did pick it up towards the later end of the season, but he did have struggles with that. And with all the odds against him, I can't really put too much of the blame on Trevor Lawrence. But I will also say he wasn't the solution this season either, and that's why the Jaguars ultimately ended up with a 3-14 record. And with that being said, I'm going to wrap up this video, so thank you for listening. If you are new, make sure to leave a like, and also make sure to subscribe, and as always, peace out, Duval.